All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here. We'll be talking with Marissa Sison. She's a lead experience manager from Verizon and focuses on consumer insights. So we're really excited to have Marissa here, our customer. And we'll be talking with her today about research when it comes to innovation, along with figuring out unmet needs customers have and some best ways to go about that. So her and I will be having a conversation today. If you have any questions that you want to ask, put it in the questions, Mark. Is that what we're doing? In the chat functionality, put it in there. If you want to ask a question, feel free to share your video and we can unmute you as well. Just kind of raise your hand if that's something that you want to do. Yeah. But without further ado, let's get started. One thing I do want to mention is that the views today are of Marissa's and not necessarily Verizon's. So just wanted to give that little caveat. Marissa, welcome. We're happy to have you today.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's an honor to be part of this discussion.
Awesome. Well, I thought what we could get started was maybe if you could talk a little bit about how Verizon thinks about research when it comes to innovation specifically.
All right, let me just clarify. My role at Verizon is I head up the research area in the home consumer product space. So I am not in the wireless division, which are the cell phones and all that stuff. I am on the home side. Just think of it as your cable TV, etc. So, and the research that I'm doing is very exciting because innovation is the upfront work. And this is where it's really important for us to listen to the voice of the customer. I mean, typically when you work at a tech company, I worked at General Motors, and even with many years at CPG, we often have this attitude that if you build it, they will come. And it's not necessarily the case, because if you can't offer a consumer benefit, what is that consumer trying to solve? And you don't offer a relevant differentiating benefit, they will not come no matter what you build. And so it is extremely important at this upfront stage where we will be investing to be able to listen to that customer. So when we're looking at prototypes, exploring partnerships, that's really first and foremost on our minds. And the way we do it is we do some user experience research. We do have a lab, I think it's in Massachusetts. We do a lot of quantitative surveys that I do with QuestionPro with very large samples of up to about 2,000 respondents.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's interesting when, I think a lot of companies, fall into the trap. If you build it, people are going to use it automatically, but unless you're doing this research, you don't really know. So that's an important point, obviously, with the different quantitative and qualitative studies. Would you say that it's a mix of both qualitative and quantitative, or does it lean one way or the other more so in your expertise?
I would say it is a mix of both, and I can't quantify what percentage will be qualitative and what percentage would be quantitative, because it'll vary from project to project and from prototype and innovation to innovation. But we typically start with doing what you would call focus groups. And nowadays, of course, it's really great to do that online. Yep. People remain anonymous, and they are much more candid when they provide feedback, knowing that they are online. Yep. And then you use the inputs, the feedback from the consumer, to gain greater validation, and that's where the power of quantitative research comes in. You can then cite, you have larger samples, where you know where the margin of error is, and you can present senior management with actual data rather than the colorful commentary that you get from qualitative. And then, of course, in our user experience, that is a lot of qualitative feedback, but we do have very large, based on the typical focus groups, a large enough sample to get the feedback. And what's even more important is that consumers are touching, playing, and using the actual product rather than just imagining what they will be doing. So that's really the exciting part about, working in a company like Verizon.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It's interesting that even on focus groups, you get some of those high numbers where you can even quantify it and take it really from a qualitative more to a quantitative study. That's an interesting point. I kind of shifting gears a little bit, but closely related are, what are some of the ways that you figure out what problems and unmet needs the customers have?
To tell you the truth, that's a very challenging question, and I'm sure a lot of consumer insights people and market researchers and even product development teams struggle with that question. The way I tend to think of it is, first you have to have a view of the world, and what that means is, in technical jargon, some assumptions coming in, because you need to start with a way of thinking. So when you take a look at consumer needs, the question that we're asking is, what problem or problems is a consumer trying to solve? So when you start with the unmet need, you have two components. One is that current solutions are not meeting their needs. And then the other piece of that is no solutions exist, but consumers know that they need something. Now, on the other side, we have what I call the demand creation. And this is fulfilling a need that consumers don't even realize they have. So let me give a few examples.
Mhm.
When you take a look at needs that are not currently met by solutions in the marketplace, I will take and show you, if you can see this, let's see.
Like the Swiffer?
It's a Swiffer
Mhm.
box. So if you take the story of Swiffer, that is a solution to a need by consumers where the current solutions are not satisfying to them. So with the Swiffer story, it's sort of like Legendary, where Procter & Gamble, they sent a bunch of design anthropologists and ethnographers, and they discovered among the consumers that they spent half of their time cleaning the floor using a variety of different products, and then half of the time taking their cleaning products and cleaning them. So the insight there is, wouldn't it be nice to have a product where you can use just one thing to clean your floor, and you don't have to bother cleaning your cleaning instrument? And hence the Swiffer was born. And then when you take a look at, there are currently no solutions in the marketplace, but consumers recognize a need. The example of Tile, it's a blue chip enabled location device.
Yep.
So we all know that it's very frustrating to lose something at home, particularly your keys. That's a perfect example. And you can't find them, but with the Tile, you're attached to your Bluetooth on your phone, and then you press something and it beeps. And so in that particular case, your insight is minimizing the frustration of looking for something. So it reduces the anxiety. So that's one example. And then the other side, demand creation. These are needs, again, that consumers don't realize that they have. And it's very difficult to work in this space in terms of innovation. It requires vision. And I have to admit, consumer research is not the end all or be all. It provides an input, but you don't necessarily have to do consumer research all the time. Don't be so vain that you have, I have the answers to all of your questions. So examples of creating demand would be, if you take a look at bottled water, that is a created category. So we're all drinking bottled water. I think the cost of a gallon of bottled water is like a little over $1. I think $1.25, $1.50. If you compare the cost of tap water, for a gallon, it costs $0.004. So you take a look at that, and you now have created a demand for bottled water when it really didn't exist, and you created a category. The other one is Starbucks. If you ran a focus group and you asked people, well, would you be willing to pay $3.50 for this ounce of coffee with caramel flavoring? And consumers would say, are you nuts? But it was through Howard Schultz's marketing genius, from his experience in Europe, where he was sent there to look at housewares, and he was in Milan, and he wanted to replicate that European coffee experience. So you fast forward to the United States, you see now Starbucks as a place where people can relax, and it is your third destination. You have your home, you have your work, and then you can stay at Starbucks. Enjoy wonderful coffee, and then you can relax. And unfortunately, people spend a lot of time on their laptops, so you'll have to try to find a seat
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, exactly.
That's always the challenge, right?
Exactly. So how do you discover then these types of unmet needs? I went through the scenario where you have two different kinds of needs: unmet, where the solutions are inadequate or solutions don't exist, but consumers know that they have a need. And then when you have a demand creation, this is where you're convincing consumers, you didn't realize you had a need for this, we have the solution, and we have a compelling reason why you should take our products. Again, all boils down to the benefit, and it has to be relevant, and it also has to be differentiating. So how do you do that? Well, you go through your traditional consumer research. You basically ask them your questions, and sometimes the answers are evident. In other cases, you have to infer, and you have to combine your product technology, the things my company can do, what we can produce that is cost effective and that we realize it will generate revenue and the right profitability to support that project. So you ask consumers, what do you think of this? What's wrong with it? What's right with it? And then they begin to realize that, well, you know what, this is really an interesting idea. I've never really thought about it. And so we go from there. And what you need to understand too is when you're trying to uncover unmet needs, how many of you guys are familiar with the Kano model? Yeah, the Kano model is typically used for, say, engineering or product development, but you can very well apply that in the area of consumer research. When you take the x-axis, you have the demand, consumer demand. On the very left, you have the unmet need, and on the right, you have consumer needs are met. When you take the y-axis, the top of that axis is satisfaction, and at the bottom is dissatisfaction. So when you are looking at unmet needs, you want to be in the upper right-hand quadrant, where you're in that space where you're meeting a need, something that consumers want, and then they're also satisfied with your product. And usually those go together. I can give you a couple of examples for Verizon, and usually there are three consumer groups that fall into the Kano model. First, you have the basics people. These are people, they take the product or the service. If you have it, they're neutral. They don't really care. It's just that it's a price of entry. And if you don't have it, they're dissatisfied, they're not happy. So if you think about telecommunications, reliable internet service, it's a price of entry. If you have it, I'm good. But if you take that away from me, you don't give me that service, well, I'm really going to get pissed off. And then you have what is another one? I think there's the satisfiers. So I can think, again, from a Verizon perspective, if we are providing you, right now we are nationwide in terms of our 5G services, and you can take a look at two different scenarios. The first one is we're offering nationwide 5G services versus we are offering 5G services nationwide, but that's in a couple of cities in all the states. So if you remove the 5G services nationwide, people, well, if you have them, they are satisfied. But if you drop down and tell them you will get 5G services nationwide, but it's only going to be in a couple of cities, they are not going to be satisfied. So there you have this distinction. And then you have areas where these are delights, meaning if you don't have it, consumers will be satisfied, but if you do offer it, they are happy. So removing the service doesn't result in dissatisfaction among the consumers. So going back to telecommunications, we would offer free 2-day shipping when you order our mobile devices. When you order through our Verizon app or you go to our website. The other one for cable TV is we may throw in an additional service, free for the first year, and then afterwards, you pay a subscription price. So with those add-ons, if we didn't offer them, consumers will still be satisfied. If they don't get free shipping, but we deliver the product to them, it's not broken, they're happy. But when we tell them you get free 2-day shipping, and it's on us. And you can see that in our website. That is a delight. When you add that on, then they are more than satisfied. So if you take a look at that model, you then take a look at your being able to identify these consumer unmet needs. But like I said, it's not easy. It could be driven by vision, if you take Steve Jobs, or you can use a lot of consumer research and try to gain some information qualitatively, and the other one is quantitative. I prefer the quantitative side because it's easier for consumers to provide us feedback and for them to react rather than doing an open-end Q&A, because you have to rely on the imagination, and sometimes consumer don't think about these things that deeply.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you kind of mentioned, Steve Jobs, I think, was famous for that, right? Like, people don't know what they want until they actually have it or they see it. So kind of to that point, like, I think it's a little bit, you mentioned the, the Swiffer, the floor mop stuff, but it's also like Clorox wipes, right? Like, I didn't even know I needed Clorox wipes until I saw them in the store and started using them, right? And now you can't find them with the pandemic happening. So it's interesting how these unmet needs then become necessities, right? So it's something you rely on. It's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you take a look at my wallpaper, I'm just gonna go move a little bit. You see these light bulbs that are not lit. And then all of a sudden over here, you have a light bulb that is lit. And that's the story of innovation. So I'm glad you brought up Clorox. In terms of doing product innovations, you can do a brand extension, meaning you take your brand and you make products and services that are in categories that are adjacent to you. And then you have a line extension where you have the brand and then you just make varieties of products within the same category. But in the case of Clorox, when you start with a very humble bleach, it moves on and on and on to different product categories, but you are delivering the same basic benefit, which is cleanliness and fighting bacteria. So from your humble bleach, you now get into the Clorox wipes. So you could argue this could be a different delivery mechanism, but Clorox has also gone into cleaning products like a brush, a toilet wand, etc. So now you've got a brand that has now gone into another category, and that would be a brand extension. And you'll find that in telecommunications as well. Let's just take the story of AT&T. Alexander Graham Bell, actually, he didn't invent the phone. According to my notes here, it was a Frenchman, Meucci, who actually invented the first phone in 1849. But it was Alexander Graham Bell that had the patent in 1876, and he kind of established AT&T. So you here have a brand that started with a landline, eventually moved into the wireless category, and then you moved into non-wireless in the home, and then it moved into in the home as well with television, streaming devices, and then you've gotten to home security, and then of course you have the AT&T part of the business. So you go that way. And then if you look at Xfinity, it's going the other way, where they start with your Comcast, your home products with the cable TV. And now they move to the other end, where they're now in the wireless category, offering cell phones and cell phone services.
Right. No, that's super interesting, because it kind of dovetails what we were talking about earlier with, if brands don't innovate, they're going to, eventually die, right? So you see Clorox and AT&T innovating into other product lines that help them continue on. I think really, really interesting. What sort of things, once you figure out the unmet need, how do you get that information back to the product team? Are there things that you find that work really well in doing that?
The most successful teams are the ones that cooperate and they don't throw things over the wall. So the way we do it at Verizon, in my particular area, which is the consumer home products, we work together as a team. So the product managers have some idea to develop a product and service, but they needed to find out whether or not indeed this is something that consumers want. So they come to a person like myself who does consumer research, we talk about it, and we first settle on the business objective. What business problem are we trying to solve? And more than half the battle is getting alignment on that particular area. When you're a product developer, you are very concerned about the features and benefits of a product. It does have a business implication, but from the point of view of asking that consumer, we have to be very clear on what we're asking. What benefit are you offering as you're developing these prototypes? So that's the beginning of the conversation. We look at a request for research. And what's very important, at least the way I do it, is in developing the questionnaire, we do it jointly. So I create a draft. Members of the product team take a look at it. They make suggestions. I come up with a second draft. We iterate until we come to alignment on the final version of a questionnaire. And it goes on field. The report comes back. We all read it. And then I set up discussions. Do we have to iterate? Do we have to take a look at more analysis? What's our feedback? Is this helping you? So having that collaboration and making sure that you don't throw anything over the fence really makes for a good use of consumer insights that will directly help your product innovation. So that's how we get together.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's easy to throw things over the wall, right? But
yeah.
that's the easy part. So
yeah,
but you're not doing that, I think, is hard and takes a lot of discipline, I think, as well.
absolutely.
Great. So I know we have, we've been talking for about 20 minutes here. I want to just ask a few more questions, and then feel free, if you guys have any questions, put it in the chat and we'll spend a few minutes mentioning those to Marissa and get her to answer some of those questions for you. Marissa, I would be remiss if I didn't ask how QuestionPro has helped you in some of these initiatives and what tools have enabled you to effectively conduct your research.
Yeah, I am a proponent of QuestionPro. It's a great self-service survey platform that allows you to write your questions. They have suggested scales. You can do tabulations very easily. They do have some built-in techniques such as max diff, for example, discrete choice, Van Westendorp, and so I use many of those tools. And the other thing that I really have to say is I have yet to encounter a platform that provides fantastic sample. So I know the quality of the respondents that I get from QuestionPro, and I know that because I'm actually in the midst of a study where I conducted one that was the first round, and now we're into the second round. I have an identical question there, and the percentage of respondents that answered question in a particular way, like a yes, no, I got the exact same percentage in the second round of the survey. So you know that there's a test, retest, and there's that validation. You don't get that if your sample is not of high quality.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Tim, our audience guy, will be happy to hear that. No, I think one more question for you, Marissa, as we're having this fireside chat here, or quote unquote fireside chat, I suppose. Where do you see quant research going over the next couple of years? Anything new, or just continuation of some of the methods that we're using now?
Where I currently sit, I still see a continuation of where we were at about from 10 years ago. So the importance of behavioral data. Increasingly, marketers want to look at behavioral data because consumers don't necessarily say what they do. Okay. Or do what they say. Whatever.
Right.
Anyway,
do
whatever.
what they say,
Yeah, they don't necessarily do what they say. The other one is looking at behavioral economics, and that's kind of like, that's the nice thing, because consumers are assumed to be irrational, and there are a number of factors that affect their decision-making process that are not necessarily maximizing utility or the classic economics model of the decision-making. So you take a look at risk-averse factors, societal influences, crowdsourcing, etc. A solution to that would be, of course, you put the right questions, albeit imperfectly, to try to address these other non-economic factors that drive their decision making. And then the third one, that's one of my favorites, is in the area of neuroscience, where you get consumer reaction. People know in their brain, these are the cognitive reactions and these are the emotional reactions, and they're red and they're green for negative and positive. But at the end of the day, what we have there is we are measuring, and we are getting better at measuring the what. But we need to understand the why. And so tools like QuestionPro help in answering the why. You have to ask a series of questions.